So recently I was thinking about all the things that I fear, and there's particularly a few things that I cannot stand, and one of them is I cannot and I fear snakes and also spiders. And I would say that I would include peanut butter in the same category, because even though I don't fear peanut butter, I can't stand peanut butter. Even the smell of it makes me sick. And that's because of a bad experience that I had with it when I tried it for the first time about 17 years ago. I was doing some research online about what kind of fears people have, and I was surprised to learn that actually the number one fear is to get in front of their peers and, say some kind of speech. So I can definitely relate with this fear that people have about public speaking, because when I came to the US, I was about 15 years old. I didn't have a lot of friends, and at the same time, I felt that God is calling me into ministry. And in ministry, you do a lot of public speaking. And I remember just constantly dreading the day where if I get in front of people, are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to laugh at me? Are they going to throw stuff at me? And a lot of these fears are just completely irrational, but we get in our mentality that somehow some of the bad experiences that we had in the past might happen again, and we fear that. We fear that we will be rejected. And I think that's one of the reasons that people don't want to get in front of people and talk about it, because a lot of their insecurities might be exposed, or the way they talk, or the way they walk, or so on and so forth. But I think public speaking is very important. I think all great men that came before us, they knew something about convincing their peers and standing up in front and declaring grand ideas. And I think when I look over history, I think of all the great one-liners, that some of the presidents have said, and some other amazing men that came before us and women that came before us. And just think of the line, for example, "I have a dream" by Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, that line kind of started the civil rights revolution. When I think of FDR saying we have nothing to fear but fear itself, I mean, that's a powerful line that gave people hope. Or when I think of Reagan, when he said his famous line, "Tear down this wall." So speeches have the power to change a nation, to change the world, and preaching has the power to change a person's life and also impact eternity. Right now, I want to give you some tips that I'm no expert by any means. I'm not, a world-class speaker, but there are certain things that helped me along the way, and I figured if I can give you the same tips, maybe it'll help you in your own passions, in your own pursuits, and if it's ministry, if it's in the business world, whatever you are at. So I want to give you some tips about how I prepare for every single time I'm about to speak. So in my case, most of the public speaking that I do is preaching, and so if you want to be a preacher, this is some of the things that helped me along the way to be able to get in front of people and talk about God and talk about my passion, talk about the things that stir my heart. All right, so when I prepare for a message, I usually know about 2 weeks in advance, and the first thing that I do, I go to people and I ask them, okay, what are they dealing with? What kind of issues, problems, struggles they are going through? And then I take those same issues to God. And the role of a preacher is kind of twofold, where he is a prophet. He is also a priest, where a priest takes the requests of people to God, and a prophet takes the requests of God towards people, or to the people. So that's kind of like the first step that I do. And then I try to listen as much as I can from God, and I'll open the Bible and pull all the verses and maybe do a Google search on all the verses on the topic that I'm speaking. So for example, if I had the topic of forgiveness, I will go and pull all the verses on that topic and then go through them and see what God is really saying and trying to find them in their context that they were intended to be understood, and so on and so forth. The next step I do is I look at what other people have said about forgiveness in the past in regards to the Bible. So, commentaries, books, sermons, and podcasts, and different conversation, maybe debates, and so on and so forth. And after that, I allow all those things to kind of like exist in my head for about a week, where I kind of wrestle with it, and I kind of try to formulate a message out of all the information that I researched and I was given. And then the final step is I take it before God and say, God, should I take anything out that maybe it should not be here? And right after that, I usually am ready to kind of like put some notes down and my format and how I'm going to deliver that message. So when it comes to formatting my sermon, a lot of people, they go up there and they have different formats. And for a while, for about 2 years, that's what I did. Every single sermon had a different format. And it was kind of a pain because I constantly had to write everything from scratch. And now I kind of abandoned all that, and I have one format that I stick with. And I came across this format in college at Northwest University, and I was reading this book by Andy Stanley, and it's called Communication for Change, and it's really good about for anything really, for any kind of communication that you do, but preaching in particular. So if you guys want to buy that book, I'm going to drop a link below this video so you can just go ahead and pick it up on Amazon. But basically, this book changed the way I preach, and he gave me a format that I usually follow, and now I've kind of personalized that format, and this is how it goes. When I get on stage, the first thing that I do is I introduce myself, and I try to kind of maybe say a story or something that's personal to me that will allow people to know that I am human, like them. I'm just like them, and that's kind of like the first stage of connecting is the introduction of who I am and maybe a personal story. The next thing is I will introduce the topic and maybe try to the best that I can to invite people into the conversation. So I'll usually tell a personal story. That's going to be an introduction, and I'll say, hey, I had this one time where I could not forgive. And then the next part of the format, I'll say, have you ever felt like that? So I invite people to be part of this conversation. I invite people to say, hey, have you felt like this before? And maybe I'll use a rhetorical question, or maybe I'll invite them in different ways. But basically the idea here is to invite them into the conversation and see, is this a struggle that you're dealing with? And usually if I did my homework before that, then it would be something relevant to what they're dealing with, because if I asked people and I went to God, then ultimately it would be relevant to them. And then the next part of this format is I point to what God says about this issue, what God says about forgiveness or unforgiveness or bitterness and so on and so forth. And I try to kind of, to me, what God says is the ultimate kind of truth, the ultimate fact. And if maybe you're doing a presentation or a speech, well, this is the part where you're gonna introduce your facts, right? And the next part of the same format, so this format has 5 parts. So introduction, and then he has, inviting people into the conversation. The next part is what God says about the issue that you're discussing. And then the next part would be, how do you apply this truth that you've been given by God, this word of God that's been given to you? How do you apply it to your own life? So it'll have maybe 3 or 4 points on how you apply it to your own life. And then the last part of my message will be a call to action. If it's coming and repenting, if it's praying for your neighbor, praying for people to be saved, or maybe if you are not in ministry, it would be something like, signing a petition. Maybe you want them to bring awareness to a specific cause. So it's a strong call to action. So that's kind of the format of the message that when I usually get in front of people, that's what I do. So once I got done with my format, the next thing that I do is I have to make sure before I go on stage that I'm prepared. And a few different things that I check is make sure that I'm hydrated, make sure that I've drank a lot of water. So when I get up there, I'm not like, my mouth is not all dried up. And the second thing is make sure that the clothes that I wear is not uncomfortable. It's not something that will make me hot or cold, or something that is not right for the occasion. If I came to speak at a business meeting and I came with a baseball hat and like jeans, they might not take you seriously. If you get on stage at a church and you're completely have some weird clothes on, that might be distracting to someone. So once I get on stage, this is the time where I have to engage people pretty quickly, because we live in a time where people's attention spans are not very long. So we have to engage them and we have to keep their attention. And I think there's certain tools that I use that I think that are very useful. And one of them is humor. If I can make people laugh, first of all, it makes you appear more trustworthy. And not that you're looking for appearances, but I think it's very important, because a lot of times people that came to hear you speak, they might be very rigid because of their past experiences, and you have to break that. You have to break the ice. And I think humor is a great tool to use. And a lot of times people might not like that. Obviously, you don't want to go into some bad jokes, and I would not even use jokes that are not related to your message, because I think every single thing that you only have maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes to say your message, and you don't want to say something that is not related to what you're trying to say. So even the humor that I use, it's usually going to be attached to the overall message that I do. So that's one thing that I do. The second thing that I do is I got to make sure that I'm very purposeful on everything that I do. For example, how I move on stage. I've seen people, they walk from place to place to place to place to place to place, and it gets to a point where the audience is tired of just doing this, constantly moving their head around, trying to follow the speaker. So my professor will always say, the Slaveck, when you move with purpose. You come to this corner and you say a point. And then you go to the other corner and you say another point, and you're very purposeful in your movement, where you're very purposeful in your hand gestures. The ideal situation, what you want to do is basically draw people in with soft voice, with personal stories, and then when you have the point that you're trying to make, you kind of escalate your tone, your pitch, your level of volume, all those things, they just kind of go up a little, but not to the point where people are kind of just standing back because you're yelling the whole time. So those are some things that really help me on stage. And one thing that I want to mention before I get off the stage, I gotta make sure that I call people to some action. As I mentioned, I'll say the intro, and then I'll say the kind of the hook, or how do I engage the audience, and then I'll proclaim what God says about the situation. I'll give points exactly how they apply that to their life. And then the last thing is I try to call people to a certain action, if it's forgiving someone, if it's coming to the stage, or coming to the altar and praying, so on and so forth. So I try to do that. And then once I get done, and I've seen preachers where they don't really have anything else to say, but they just go on and on and on and on, and the audience is tired. So I'd really encourage you, if you went up there and you only have a 5-minute message, and after 5 minutes you're done, or if you planned on having a 45-minute message and you are done after 4 minutes, get off the stage. If you have nothing to say, if you have no message, then don't waste people's time, because sometimes you speak to 800 people, sometimes to 1,000, sometimes to 100. So if you have 100 people in your audience and you've given them a message for an hour, that means that you spend 100 hours of people's time. Now, if this was a great message, if you improved their life, then it's worth it. But if you just rambled on, that means that you wasted 100 hours of people's time. That is irresponsible, and I really encourage you, if you have nothing else to say, just get off the stage. Unless you're praying, unless you're singing, you should not be kind of going along just because you want to talk on stage. So that's some of the tips that I usually kind of go by. And the final thing that I do is when I get off the stage, I try to connect with people. And this is a time not about how great you are and how great your sermon was. This is a time of you finding out how you can help people even more. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video and this episode. And if you enjoy this kind of content, would you just press that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up? And if you have any tips that maybe other people benefit, would you post them as a comment below this video? Again, thank you so much for being here. Until next episode, God bless you guys. See you then.